Thank you for having us. I'm Karen Donahue.
I'm Craig Muir.
We're going to talk today about some of our work on an app called Local Haze, where we're working on air quality monitoring for citizen scientists. So the question you have to ask is, why monitor your air quality? Well, one is that there's health impacts for individuals. A few years ago, before we started building Local Haze, I was prescribed one of these, which is an inhaler for asthma. But I began to question, why do I have to carry this device around and have to keep breathing from it because I was having trouble breathing? And what exactly is in the air that's causing this? That was some sort of the basis for that. But also, in addition to individual health impacts, there's community impacts. As you can see here, there's lots of headlines, and there are more headlines every day linking air pollution to health impacts for communities at large scale. So when we think of air quality monitoring, what are we measuring? And so as Sarah was mentioning earlier, the easiest form of air pollution to measure is particulate matter, or PM as it's known. So the PM particles are often classified according to size, as she mentioned, and PM particles that are less than 2.5 micrometers in diameter are the ones that can get into your, lower respiratory tract and cause health problems. So, and PM1, which are smaller, those can even cause more health issues. I learned this, by the way, from reading this about in Sarah's book, Protecting Clean Air. It was in chapter 4. I found it very, very educational and very useful, and I'd highly recommend that you read the book. So when we talk about PM, every country has a health impact index. Excuse me for a minute. A health impact index for particulate matter. So right now we're showing you the US EPA AQI, but other countries have different indices. And you can see here, it ranges from green for good all the way to maroon for hazardous. Different values of particulate matter mapped to these different levels.
So when we looked at measuring particulate matter, the gold standard is the old-fashioned gravimetric. So you're literally just getting a filter, you weigh the filter, you blow some air through it, and then you weigh it again afterwards. And if you measure the amount of air that you've blown through it, you can then calculate the weight of the particles that have been captured in the filter. Very accurate, but very labor intensive, and is not really a continuous process. So from there, people then moved on to beta ray absorption. So this is basically sending nuclear radiation through an airflow and measuring how much of that radiation has been captured by the particles that are in the air. Of course, anything with the word nuclear in it has certain side effects, and therefore, even though it's safe, it really hasn't taken off and is very expensive to actually run. Now, both these gravimetric and beta absorption things, these are hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's a very expensive exercise going here. Next from there is this thing called a tapered element oscillating microbalance. So think of it as a tuning fork with a little tiny filter on the end. And as the particles build up on the filter, they change the weight of the tuning fork, which changes the frequency. And by using this sort of a mechanism, you can continuously or at very much shorter intervals, be able to measure the air quality. And so this is the sort of the gold standard today for measuring at a regulatory basis air quality. And these are in the tens to low hundreds of thousands of dollars. So not something that an individual can actually get. Now, in recent times, though, semiconductors have really come down in cost and in functionality. And so now there's two ways of being able to use semiconductors to measure air quality. The first is just to shine a laser through the laser light through the airstream and count the number of times that the laser gets interrupted. And the second one being light scattering, which is just basically looking at what you do with a haze when you send it through the light. So just sending it through and looking at how much scattering happens. And this is the dominant one that is today in the consumer things. And both of these particle sensors and things are in the sort of the $50 to $100 range. So you can actually buy something off the shelf much cheaper. So a lot of people have gotten and taken these low-cost sensors and put them into various devices that citizen scientists and concerned consumers can actually use. And these involve anything from Purple Air and URAD monitoring things, which are commercial groups, to groups such as Sensor Community in Europe, which just produces designs and kits, and people put them together from there. So these are anywhere from like $300 to about $50 in cost. Now, once you've got these cheap sensors, what do you do with them? And basically what's happened is that everyone has created an Internet of Things system around them. So the actual sensors themselves have a small little Wi-Fi controller in them that allows them to send the data that they measure across Wi-Fi and onto the internet. And back in the cloud, each of these different sensors then runs their own cloud infrastructure to save away all of the periodic data that's coming in from them, and also then to provide APIs on which people have built web interfaces and mobile interfaces to be able to access this data. Often the web interfaces and things are created by developers, so they're not necessarily as user-friendly as you might want.
Okay, so what does Local Haze do? What Local Haze does is it crowdsources air quality sensor readings worldwide over 6 continents, about 31,000, just over 31,000 sensors, and then it rates the data for sensor accuracy and presents it in an easy-to-use experience. So let's take a look at the app in action. You launch the app on an iOS device, you scroll through sensors, you can drill down and look at sensors, or you can navigate through a map. This is native iOS gesture interaction. Look at sensors, drill down, and see the sensor data in detail. So that's the app. And what's challenging about developing this kind of user experience is that you have an aggregation of sensors from many different types of sources. Excuse me, you have the low-cost sensors, as Craig was mentioning, Purple Air, Sensor.community, and URED Monitor. But then you also have these expensive sensors. And when you have to design a user experience where you're combining lots of different types of sensor data, there's a real challenge because there's a range of data quality and the volume. You have a large disparity in the volume and the quality of the data. So you have lots of low quality data and a very small amount of high quality data. And that's a presentation challenge in terms of user experience. We have a challenge where we have to communicate the quality of the data, not just the value. And as you can see here, when 95% of your data is coming from low cost sensors, you have to think about how do you present that in a way that makes sense for consumers and citizen scientists. In terms of design challenges, there's certainly the presentation challenge, which is the highest level of the software stack. Like, how do you present the data in a way on a device surface that makes sense? Scientists would expect data in Excel spreadsheets, but citizen scientists who are not scientists, but they're citizens and consumers, they expect what we call an at-a-glance dashboard experience. You can see the visual design for Local Haze on the far right, that visual language, very easy to understand. We actually collapsed the total AQI index for the EPA into something simpler and easy to understand with these confidence badges. Users of our app expect a consumer quality experience that's informed because it's iOS. And then we have to also, beyond the presentation, lower in the stack, we have to map the data into a high quality user experience. This is the behavioral part of the user experience. The interaction model and certainly the performance has to be a very high quality in real time. So you saw in that mapping interaction, which is using native iOS gestures, that mapping has to work, and the clustering techniques that we use to be able to visualize the sensors at different levels of scale has to work. We did not get it right the first time. We launched with a version of the map that had sensors really clustered so that users couldn't see them well, and so we had to iterate on that. So those are some of the challenges in terms of design. When you look at the App Store ratings and what people are saying, we're constantly looking at the feedback, but we maintain a 4.6 out of 5 stars. The feedback has been excellent, and we're always releasing new updates. We updated, we launched a subscription service so people can subscribe to sensors and get notifications when the sensor data the air quality for that sensor is deteriorating or improving rapidly, but we didn't get it right on the first release. There was too much data coming too rapidly. So in places like Northern California, people complained about the cadence, and we had to go back and iterate and do some smoothing algorithms to fix that. That's all for us, but we're really excited to hear about what Vin and Karthik have to say. And there's my contact information, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.